possible. The other thing that I just want to note is that this is being recorded, so just want you to be aware of that. And if you need to reference back to it at any point during the grant reading process, we'll have it posted by the end of the day today. And I'll send out that link via email. But without further ado, let's jump into this. So you're hearing the voice of myself, Thomas Capretta, and I'm the Direct Student Services Coordinator at the Ohio Department of Education, and I am tasked with administrating this grant. That is my contact information. That contact information is also in the signature of every email that you've gotten related to this opportunity. So you have multiple ways to find me. Also, if you can't find either of those things, if you go on the agency's website and look up the grant information, my name is also right there. So that is pretty easy to find me. Make sure that your phones and or computers are on mute during this. I believe I muted you all already, but just to cut out any background noise. And then, like I said, continue to type in the chat box with any questions. So, some quick logistics. Readers for this grant opportunity will be have the opportunity to make $75 per read, up to $900. The $75 per read will include the calibration application, and then we are planning on assigning about 4 applications per reader, so that'll give you a ballpark of where you're headed with that. And then what we're doing during this training is giving you an outline of the grant opportunities, so you're comfortable knowing kind of what's being applied for. Also set the expectations for the grant read, and then also have a little bit of practice in the grant reading process. I just saw 2 comments come in that says people still are having trouble seeing the slides. Can you please type in the box if that's an issue for you as well? And if it's not, also let me know. See a couple people not being able to see them. We're like 50-50 with can and cannot see them. That's strange. Well, we're going to keep going for the time being. Please, again, feel free to follow with the slides that were sent to you. I may try in a second to share my screen instead of the PowerPoint itself. Sometimes that's easier. So thanks for those of you that typed in the chat box as well to let me know. So the first section that we're going to talk about today is kind of just what is the grant and what people are applying for. So the expanding opportunities for each child grant is a set aside from Title I of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act as reauthorized as the Every Student Succeeds Act. And states had the opportunity to set aside part of their Title I allocations to create a competitive grant opportunity for struggling schools and that'll serve their students. Ohio is one of only a few states that decided that this was going to be a good option for them. And we wanted to put this grant out for schools to have some seed money or some starter funds to start some innovative and rigorous programs. So the goal of this grant in its current opportunity is to expand access and enrollment to career pathways or advanced coursework. And this is also focused on increasing educational options for students who are in struggling homes and students who come from families of low-income backgrounds. So all of these grants are for 3 years, and this grant will be for FY 19, 20, and 21. The last part of this grant, or the last kind of big focus of this grant, is that it's aligned to their continuous improvement plans, and we've asked them to be explicit throughout the application about those linkages. So now we'll get into what they're going to be writing about, these two specific areas. Again, those areas are creating career pathways, expanding or creating opportunities for advanced placement or international baccalaureate coursework. That's what we're kind of talking about when we're talking about the advanced coursework pathway. And local education agencies had the option of applying for both of these areas in separate applications. The requirements in the scoring rubric may be required for either only option 1 or option 2. So we'll practice with that a little bit in a little later in the presentation, but it's important when we're going through the rubric to be aware of that. If you see like a 5A or a 5B, that's going to mean that we're only looking at one of those at a time, or one of those for each option. The other thing to note is that this grant is for expanding access or enrollment. So we're really looking towards either new programs or significant expansions of existing programs. When we're talking about career pathways, which is option 1, we're really talking about the fact that applicants should be able to align their proposals to in-demand job sectors and to workforce gaps in their community, and we provided some tools in their RFA to look at those. Again, we want it to be aligned to continuous improvement plans, and ensure that they're sustainable, meaning sure that they have realistic plans for moving forwards in the future. And there's an entire section of that in the grant, actually, that they have indicators for students and adults, and that they've planned for stakeholder engagement to inform all of this. The last thing is about demonstrating the connection of the credentials that they'll be working towards to students' graduation and their graduation rates, which should be pretty easy because actually credential attainment is part of a graduation pathway. So we'll be looking for that type of connection. When it comes to option 2, or AP and IB access, we will be looking for some similar things, but a couple of different things too. So one, when we're talking about AP and IB, we're really looking about how it expands access. Is it giving opportunities to students that previously didn't have these opportunities? Again, aligned to continuous improvement plans. We want to make sure that their expectations for how we're expanding that access, what type of student participation are we looking for and why. Additionally, we're looking for, again, student and adult goals and indicators for implementation. Are the strategies linked to things that we know are going to increase performance? That's going to come into play when we talk about research and evidence base. And then something that really is applicable to both these, but specifically looking for in APIB, is are we reducing the fees that are barriers to students to participate, or eliminating them completely, ideally? So now let's look at what the application actually holds in it. So before we get to the 10 requirements and the items within them, there is some allowable and unallowable uses. A lot of these things we at the department will be paying attention to closely, but there are also things that are important to be aware of in case people's applications are just completely, off base. So when we're talking about this, the real basic gist of it is that funds need to be being used, have a direct impact on the program proposed, or direct impact on students via the program proposed. So we're not talking really about salaries, we're not talking about fringe or like facilities and stuff like that, but what we are talking about is curriculum materials, supplies pertaining to career pathways. So do we need like specialized equipment or things like that to be able to have the class? Staff professional development and training around this work, things like that. We talked about equipment. Now, salary might come up if they're talking about substitutes during teacher training and stuff, and that is allowable. And then we talked about assessment fees and credential fees are other big allowable expenses. The unallowable expenses, like we talked about, salaries, benefits, those are out. Grant writing expenses are a no-go. Vehicle purchases and transportation are not allowable unless they are directly related to the specific program being proposed. Capital expenses, buying building or land, is not allowable. Food, unless curriculum supplies, obviously you can't run a culinary arts program without food, so that we might look at that one a little more closely. But the one that's a little tricky is building repair or renovation, because we do not want schools using this money to be updating classrooms. However, if they can write into their proposal some type of upgrade that is necessary to either install equipment that is required for a class or something like that, then we would consider that. I just got a question that says, can you explain what an industry recognized credential means? And that's a good question. We can find out a lot of information about it on the Department of Education's website. But if for schools implementing or trying to apply for option 1, which is career pathways, all of those need to be aligned or at least working towards an industry recognized credential. And an industry recognized credential is a certificate of completion or a certificate of achievement around a test or practicum that tells employers that students who went through these classes have a defined set of skills for a certain industry sector. So a really easy example of this is your CPR first aid certification. A lot of different agencies recognize that as a professional set of skills that are kind of commonplace, whether you got it in like Cleveland or Cincinnati. If you pass your CPR certification, then you can conduct CPR. Other ones might include things like like physical therapy assistance certification. So that's like a complete professional certification that you could achieve. There's a full list of these on the department's website, but they should also be just explicitly identifying what those credentials are. I also have another question, and this is probably going to be more of a question for me as the ODE consultant. Is food during professional development for teachers and staff allowable? And I don't want to make a blanket call on that right now, but probably not, because that's not directly related to the academic activity. Okay, so to submit this, they had to upload their applications as a PDF and label it accordingly. And so just so you know, if you were grant scorers in the past for other applications, all of the applications were uploaded by document upload. So they're either PDFs or Excel files. And the things they need to have is their application, their checklist with signatures, their 3-year budget, and any supplemental evidence that they might have put in. Their checklist might have included a petition to amend their school board if they needed to upload their school board's approval or letter of support. You basically don't have to worry about the checklist. That's kind of more of an ODE thing, but you will be, the 2 documents you'll be working with the most are the application and the 3-year budget sheet. So feel free now, if you'd like to and have the RFA open, that could be helpful, because I'm going to be calling out some pages that some of this information is on. But we're going to go through the application requirements. There's 10 of them. They're multi-part. Some of the parts apply either to career pathways or advanced coursework, so we got to pay attention for that. And then just a note, requirement 1 is a submit only section, but we're making sure that it's in there. So like I said, feel free to follow along, and we'll talk a little bit about this. Requirement 1 is a table, and the table includes all types of information about the school, including the students they project to serve, some things like the rate of students who come from economically disadvantaged families, students that are going to be served per grade, and then also just some basic information about the application option they're selecting and what their improvement status is. We've asked each district that they fill out a table for each school that is submitting or that is part of their application. So you might see applications that have 2 or 3, maybe even 4 tables in there. And that is so we could all see the actual picture of students being impacted at each school by this program. Other things to pay attention for is that the area of focus that they're applying for is on here, and obviously that's going to be labeled all throughout the application, but it's important that that is identified in this table. And then this is on page, if you want to get a look at it, it's on page 10 of the RFA. It's pretty straightforward, it's pretty self-explanatory, but that is requirement 1. So requirement 2, we get a little more intense and into the weeds. This is about identification and context. So many of the schools applying for these grants might be in improvement identifications in the state of Ohio. So we would be looking to describe for schools to describe either what factors have led them to be in an improvement status, or if they're not in an improvement status, how these services are going to benefit students and kind of the students that we're trying to serve, right? We're looking for to expand access to students from low-income backgrounds and students from who are in schools that are struggling at times. So this might include kind of an analysis of academic or non-academic data, input from the community, maybe post-secondary outcomes, also maybe adult indicator data. They might express that they've had trouble implementing things in the past, but we're really just looking for more than we're an intensive district, and that's why we're intensive. So looking towards requirement 3, this covers needs assessment. All districts have done some needs assessment at some time through the year. This application might have required a more specific either analysis of their needs or even more focus groups and stuff with their community. So we're looking first for what the educational needs of the student are and what the community needs are, and then also kind of their process. How did they get feedback from families in the community? How do they get feedback from students? So we're kind of looking for more than just report card data, and it can look a lot of different ways. People use all different types of needs assessments. But we're also really focused on how they're collecting information from business partners, community partners, families, and students. So it's kind of in 2 parts, right? What are your needs, and then what was kind of your process to identify that? It's important to note that item 5 on this part of the application is the first time there's going to be an A and a B. So A is for option 1, B is for option 2, and you'll score accordingly in the CCIP. For requirement 4, is about strategies and activities. And this is like the heart of the application, because we're going to be describing the evidence or research-based strategies that will be used to increase access to high-quality career pathways or advanced coursework. And here we're also really looking for alignment to the continuous improvement plan. So in this section, we're really looking for how they made the decision to kind of organize these strategies and activities, what research says about it, what evidence there might be around it. Did they look in any clearinghouses to make sure that this is a program that's going to be effective and meet their needs? I think another thing that's super important is making sure that the strategies and activities that they're choosing to implement actually address the needs that they've presented. It's sometimes easy to pick a evidence-based or research-based strategy that doesn't actually directly address your needs. So that's always an important thing to look out for. And then the other thing, they should explicitly be writing about how this aligns their continuous improvement efforts and things that are in their continuous improvement plan. So you shouldn't have to go looking for that. They should present you with that information. Impact for students is requirement 5, and this is where they're going to set their goals. So we're looking for expectations for student and staff performance. Description should be by building level if they're serving multiple buildings. Buildings have different outcomes, so they should have different goals to improve those outcomes. There's also here, item 12 has an option that is for, item 12 has parts that are specifically for either option 1 or option 2, so be aware of that. We're looking for SMART goals, and we're looking for an impact. So are they looking to improve graduation rate? Will their goals lead to credential attainment increases, maybe ACT access, or post-secondary outcomes? So those are just some things to look out for there. Impact evaluation or reporting is just kind of exactly what it sounds like. We're looking for applicants to have a plan to collect and use data to evaluate the impact of the project and also make decisions about the implementation of that project. So what is the process that they have for evaluating? Are they working through team-based structures? Do they have data collection tools in place? Do they have a plan for communication? And that's really the other item here is, well, how are they communicating this information to stakeholders, whether those be internal or external. Requirement 7 talks about integration to the continuous improvement plan. And this is where they will describe how their program will be coordinated with their improvement plan and how families, students, and the community will be engaged in this process. So a question just came in that is timed perfectly for this that says, will we need to see or read their continuous improvement plan? So we do not expect you to be reading their continuous improvement plans. We expect, and I made as clear as possible to applicants, that they need to be explicit about how this aligns to their plans and how this is part of a holistic effort of improvement at their schools or buildings. Their continuous improvement plans are publicly viewable, but we do not. You should not be going back and forth to try to either justify or make connections between them if they haven't made the connections for you. Really, that was my notes about this. Now that I'm looking down, it's not really your responsibility to score what they don't include in the plan. So don't worry about it. It is important, though, that they include this part on how they're engaging students, families, and their community to inform that as well. So, requirement 8 is the budget and justification. So there are some things to be aware of, but what you're going to be looking at is an uploaded budget sheet with 3-year amounts proposed. Should be uploaded to the CCIP. Now they have a 1% allowance for outreach and communications and a 2% allowance for administration of programs. You can stop looking for your calculators. You don't really have to worry about that part. We will do that as the ODE consultant. What you'll be looking for mostly is in their budget narrative. Looking to make sure that kind of what they're proposing is allowable, coherent, and reasonable to the best of your ability. Looking for inconsistencies in the budget or things that just flat out don't really make sense to you. If you look at their budget and they have 50% of their funds allotted for administration or something, feel free to put a note on it. But again, we're really mostly looking to make sure that these are allowable, coherent, and reasonable. Number 9 is sustainability. This is really supposed to be seed money. So we need to think about realistically, how will this work continue? It might come from title funds, might be from their local funds, or maybe community partnerships, but realistically is the key word on this one. Number 10, and the last one here, is providing a timeline for and multi-year planning and timeline. So we want a timeline for planning and evaluation of student impact, but also kind of a holistic timeline of what is the entire implementation of this going to look like. So does this really capture the key aspects that was outlined in their application? That's kind of mostly what we're looking for. So if there are any questions about that, I see a couple questions coming in about accessing documents on the CCIP, and we'll help you with that individually in a couple minutes. But are there any questions that you might want to pop in about any of these requirements? Well, if you got any, I know sometimes it takes a second to type it out. Pop them in there and we'll get to them. But I also want to talk a little bit about the scoring rubric so we can be comfortable with what we're looking for here. And Rosemary and Nancy, I see your comments there, and I'm going to address them in a couple minutes. So we're going on a 0 to 5 scale here, with 5 being exemplary. And so up here is the description of the rubric, and you'll also see this in the RFA. I'm not going to read the entire rating characteristic to you, but I do want to point out a couple things. When we're talking about exemplary, we're talking about an expression of a thorough understanding of an issue. We want to make sure the information's accurate and relevant. We want to make sure there's evidence of connection to the CCIP. You might see in there it says consistent and clear, and that's kind of just saying, does it follow the same line of thinking throughout the application? So, and we want to make sure that the action steps match the strategies, would be the other thing here. When we look at high quality, or number 4 here, the evidence should be persuasive. Like, you should still think that this is a good idea, what they're proposing. It seems to align to their improvement plan, but you might have a question or two. It supports and increases access to outcomes. And again, those action steps should align to the strategies. For some quality, we would want to see evidence included around the implementation of the prompt. Does it make sense? You might see some places where their CCIP plan, their continuous improvement plan, is related to the application, but you're having trouble drawing a direct line on how they're aligned. It appears to support student access and improvement, but you might have a couple questions here or there. And then you might have a concern or two with implementation, or at least questions about it. That might come up in a score of 3. Looking at low quality, or 2, you're going to see some evidence, but it's not necessarily convincing. You're going to maybe see that the application isn't aligned to the CCIP. Student outcomes, it's unclear on how strategies are getting to improve these outcomes. And then you might have some concerns about implementation. When we look at number 1, the responses have limited or weak quality. It's not aligned to the continuous improvement plan. You think it might be unlikely that the strategies are going to drive improved outcomes for students. And you have pretty significant concerns about how the steps are going to be implemented. If something's incomplete or missing, it's pretty straightforward. The response either is not provided or significantly incomplete, or they might point to appendices or other parts of the application that just aren't there. So that would be when you score a 0. So what you see up on your screen right now is a example of in the rubric where there is a item for option 1 and an item for option 2. And this is a real item. Item 5A and 5B both address needs assessment, but 5A is focused on needs assessment for option 1, and 5B is focused on needs assessment for option 2. So if you're scoring option 2, what you would do is select non-applicable in item 5A and then score just like normal for 5B. It's pretty straightforward in that way, but it is something you have to pay attention to, so you make sure that your items are lined up. Okie dokie. So now I'm going to turn it over to colleague Dr. Lodeman, who's going to talk a little bit about the actual process of reading and scoring.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning, folks. Some of you have probably heard me before. There are some new readers, so you haven't heard me before. And what we're trying to do is make sure that everyone gets on the same page of the hymnal, so to speak. So if you've heard this before, you can check me for reliability. If you haven't heard me before, then this will be new information that I think you'll find pretty interesting. Prospectus for reviewing competitive grants. The first thing we want to do is to make sure that everybody has a fair opportunity to have their applications read and scored in a quality process. And that's what we're about today. We are going to go through the reader training, and the outcome of the reader training is going to be the proposal selection that is going to be determined directly by the reads and scores that you assign on the various items on the scoring rubric. And you're going to have an opportunity to look at the items on the scoring rubric and ask questions about those a little later this morning. We also ask that you use your best sense of professional ethics as you read and score these applications. Now, what would that mean? Well, we want you to give a fair read and to use your best sense of professional judgment as you read and score these applications. And you have to remember that when you look at this application, you have to consider it from the context of the applicant, not necessarily the context in which you are sitting. Now, what does that mean? Well, if they happen to be from a rural area and you're from an urban area, you have to put yourself in the perspective of being in a rural area. Conversely, if you're in a rural area and they're in an urban area, you have to put yourself in the perspective of the urban area and use your best professional judgment as you read and score these applications. Content validity of the instrument. There's a scoring rubric. It has 25 items on it, and we're going to ask you to use that scoring rubric as a guide to allocate your scores. There's a one-to-one correspondence between what we've asked them to do in the request for application, the RFA, and what's on the scoring instrument. And that automatically then builds in content validity. The second thing we're going to ask you to do is in the CCIP, you're going to be putting a score in for each item. And in order to go through the CCIP, you're going to have to put in a comment associated with your score. There ought to be a correspondence between your comment and the score. So if you think this is a high score, your comment shouldn't be saying something negative about what's there. If it's a low score, it shouldn't be saying this is the best thing since sliced bread relative to that item. So we ask you to provide feedback, and we ask you to use your best sense of professional judgment and to be a little politically correct and avoid saying things like, this is a good application, period. Or if you say it's a good application, tell them why it's a good application, or this is a strong point, or this is not a strong point because of A, B, or C. So we ask you to provide that feedback. And think about it this way. If this were your application, what kind of feedback would be helpful to you? And you don't have to write a book for each set of feedback. You can make bullet points, short phrases and sentences, but be careful about how you write this and be professional about how you say things. And be a little careful with your grammar and spelling, because it sends a bad message to them if there are typos or if there are spelling errors or grammar faults. It says you're not doing a professional job as a reviewer, and they have less than faith in what you're saying. So just be a little careful there. Capacity building and learning. Each of these applicants has developed some capacity building and learning by reviewing their own situation and putting things down on paper. Correspondingly, you are going to develop some capacity building and learning as well as you read and score these applications. You're going to find things in there you think, oh, this is a pretty good idea. I might be able to take that and use it back at the ranch. On the other hand, you might find some things that you think, this is not a good idea, and there's no way that I'm going to use it, or maybe it's useful somewhere else, but not for me. So you're going to develop some capacity as you read and score these applications. And what we're about this morning is to develop some shared meaning and understanding of not only the scoring rubric, but as Tom has indicated, what the application is trying to secure from the applicants. So we want you to be able to move through the process and develop that shared meaning and common understanding. We want you to draw upon your grant reading expertise. Some of you have read before, some of you this is your first time. So if this is your first time, it's going to be a learning experience for you. We want this to be a positive learning experience. If you have done it before, you have some experience in reading and scoring applications. We want you to bring that to bear as you read and score these applications. The evaluations are based on the criteria and the scoring rubric. The criteria are the 10 requirements that Tom spoke about earlier, and the scoring rubric then corresponds with those 25 items to those 10 requirements. We want objective assessments of assigned applications. You're going to be assigned applications after you have read and scored a calibration application. You're going to be doing that yet this morning. Once you finish that and turn it in, then you will be assigned applications to actually score. Those applications are not yet populated in your inbox. They will only be populated after you've read and scored the calibration applications. The scores and comments are going to be used to determine who ultimately gets funding. So you have a pretty good responsibility here to be professional and high quality in your work. Read all applications entirely. Well, why is that? Well, not every writer writes in the same fashion, and you're not going to find the answer to item 1 in the scoring rubric in the first paragraph of the application. It might be anywhere in there. As long as it's in there, it's fair game. So read the entire application before you try to score. And follow instructions as provided. They're pretty straightforward. And remember this, if they don't tell you what they're going to do in the application, don't assume something is going to happen. For example, if they tell you they're going to have a parent program, but they never describe the parent program, don't assume a parent program is going to happen. You can only rely on what's contained in the application. And you're going to provide a numerical score for each prompt. That numerical score is on a 6-point scale from 0 to 5, with 0 being the worst thing since square wheels, and a 5 being the best thing since sliced bread, with all shades of gray in between. You're also going to be providing constructive comments with suggestions for improvement. So if something's good, tell them it's good. If something isn't so good, let them know that something isn't good and why it would not be good or why it would be good. So you're going to provide summaries of strengths and weaknesses and treat all applications in a fair and equitable fashion. And again, remember to have your scores consistent with your comments. So if you give it a 5 and then pan it in terms of your comments, there's some inconsistency there. Conversely, if you give it a score of 1 and tell them this is the best section in the whole application, that's not consistent either. So make sure your comments are consistent with your item scores. Comments must be based on the scoring rubric, and you'll see that scoring rubric here momentarily. Characteristics of high-quality comments. They're objective. They're specific to the prompt. They're analytical. They can be written in complete sentences. Limited to the information provided in the application, and they're courteous, professional, and understandable. Characteristics of low-quality comments. Too little documentation. That's yes, good, not good. They're repetitive, not clearly related to the selection criteria, inconsistent with assigned scores, inaccurate based on information in applications, misspelling or grammatical errors, judgments outside the scope of reader responsibility. So you get a sense of what a low-quality comment would be. Example of an acceptable comment. Strength. The applicant describes their strategies to ensure student improvement. For example, ABC. Weakness. The applicant's needs assessment demonstrates a great need, but gives more information on plans rather than strategies. Sustainability. Strength. The applicant provides a clear and convincing sustainability plan, which included elements for long-term success after funds have been exhausted. For example, they did XYZ. Weakness. The applicant has no evidence listed or other federal, state, or local program funding, as well as the factual use of any in-kind contributions. Reading proposals. Timing today. We're going to continue through this process. We're then going to have you read and ask any questions about the actual scoring rubric. We're then going to have you read a calibration application and score it, and then we'll have some what are called polling questions, and that will happen today. And by the end of the day, we want you to be able to submit your calibrated scoring application through the CCIP, and we'll work you through that as we move through today. Once that happens, you're going to be assigned actual proposals to read. We're going to give you about a 2-week window to read and score that set of applications. You'll work through a process. We'll describe that process to you as we continue through the process, and we're going to be using this thing called the CCIP, Comprehensive Continuous Improvement Plan. Thank you, Tom. To read and score the applications. We're going to have at least 3 readers per proposal. You will not know the other 2 or 3 readers who you're working with until we have to do something called potentially resolving discrepancies. We want independent reads. Now, since you don't know the other readers, that's going to be assured. But for example, if Tom and I were reading an application and I said to Tom, what did you score on item 1? I'm pretty sure that's not an independent read. So we want you to read and score these independently. Once you've done that and submitted your scores into the CCIP, internally here at ODE, we'll look at the readers on a given application to make sure that you're reasonably consistent on an application. Now, let's say that 3 of us are reading, Tom, myself, and Andrea. And Tom gives it a 5, and Andrea gives it a 4, and I give it a 2. We're not quite in sync there. We want the 3 readers or 4 readers to be within 2 points of each other. Now, with my example, we could be within 2 points of each other if Tom changed his score to a 4, or I changed my score to a 3, or both. So if there are these inconsistencies, we will be asking you to resolve discrepancies. We will contact you if there's a discrepancy to be resolved and say, okay, we want you to do this by email. And if we can't resolve it by email, then we're going to do a conference call. And if we can't resolve it by conference call, we can, in fact, agree to disagree. But we expect that to be the exception rather than the rule. Now, what does that mean? Well, Tom gave it a 5, and he really likes it because it has A, B, and C, and here's the evidence for that. And I don't like it very well because I gave it a 2, and here's my evidence for that. We can say, okay, Tom, you can keep your 5, and I can keep my 2, and we can agree to disagree. But again, we expect that to be the exception rather than the rule, because we can go back and look at that 6-point scale on the scoring rubric and say, okay, Tom, are you sure this is a 5? And Bill, are you sure this is a 2? So we think you can come to agreement. Leniency, severity of readers. Everyone comes to this with their own sense of leniency, severity. I happen to be a very severe reader. So if you were an applicant, you would not want your application scored by 3 people like me unless you adjust those scores. Conversely, there are people who are very lenient readers. Doesn't mean they're wrong, they're just more lenient. And so if you had your application read by 3 lenient readers, your application would be advantaged. So what we do is we calculate the leniency severity of each of you as readers, and then the program adjusts your scores accordingly. So if you're a severe reader, it takes your scores and adjusts them up a little bit. If you're a lenient reader, it takes your scores and adjusts them down a little bit. Now the program is good, but it doesn't work miracles. So if you happen to be, in our technical terms, a wacko, we do reserve the right not to use your scores. The probability is that that will not be a situation, and we'll be able to use your scores by adjusting for your leniency severity. Just by the way, if there are 3 readers per application, there's a 1 in 8 chance that the 3 readers are lenient. There's a 1 in 8 chance that the 3 readers are severe. There's a 3 in 8 chance that 2 of the 3 readers will be severe and 1 lenient. And there's a 3 in 8 chance of the 2 readers being lenient and 1 severe. So there's a 50% chance that unless you adjust for leniency severity, you're going to either positively or negatively bias a given application. Idiosyncratic perspective of readers. Each reader comes with their own educational background, their own set of experiences. If we only wanted one perspective, we'd only need 1 reader. But we don't want just 1 perspective. We want at least 3 perspectives. And we ask you to use your best sense of professional judgment as you read and score these applications. Length of applications. The length of applications is contained by the CCIP. So you're not going to be reading a 100-page application. Each section is contained of 4,000 characters, and therefore the length of the application can be no longer than those 4,000 characters per section, but it could be less than. Now, also because of that, when I told you before to read the entire application, well, some people have more to say in one section and less to say in another, so they may have some more room in a section. And they may stick some information in that section that is kind of out of place, but that may be a reason for that. Disclosure of conflict of interest. We will try to assign applications to you with any obvious conflict of interest already removed. However, we can't find all those potential conflicts of interest in advance. And what we're going to do is ask you, when you actually see the real applications, to take a quick look at those, and if you have any obvious conflicts of interest, to identify that to us, we will trade you out. There are plenty of applications to go around. We'll give you some other ones to read, and we'll reassign those for you. Now, what's a conflict of interest? Well, if you have a financial obligation to the district or know the people who wrote the proposal or live within that district, that's probably a conflict of interest. A rule of thumb is if you think you have a conflict of interest, you probably do. So if you find yourself in that situation, just contact Tom. He will make the appropriate changes for you and advise you as to whether this is a conflict of interest or not. But that's the second check for conflict of interest. And finally, in the analysis, we will check the data to see if there's any obvious conflicts of interest that appear after the fact. So there are three levels of checking on conflict of interest. And as I said before, we do reserve the right to eliminate readers. I've been doing this process for about 25 years. In that time, I've probably eliminated less than 10 readers for a potential problem. So the high probability is that you're not going to be eliminated as a reader, but we do reserve the right to keep that in place. Making judgments. There are 25 items on the scoring rubric. Therefore, you're going to be making 25 judgments. We're going to ask you to use your best sense of professional judgment as you read and score. And you're on this 6-point scale. I'm pretty sure you can distinguish between a 4 and a 5 and a 1 and a 2. But don't get all hung up trying to distinguish between a 4 and a 5. Pick one and move forward. The same thing is true on the lower end of the scale. Don't get all hung up trying to distinguish between a 1 and a 2 or a 2 and a 3. Pick one and move forward. Discriminations and flatlining. We're asking you to make 25 discriminations. And we're also asking you to stay away from what I call flatlining. Now, what's flatlining? Well, if we look at the profile of your 25 scores, if there are 25 threes or 24 threes and a 4, I'm pretty sure you're not making good discriminations. Now, you might occasionally find, very occasionally, find an application that has really high scores or really low scores. You don't see much variability. Now, I don't expect the variability to go 0, 5, 0, 5, 0, 5, but I do expect to see some variability across the profile of 25 scores. And in our experience, most applications have stronger and less strong sections. And so you expect to see that reflected in the profile of scores across the 25 items. And again, the awards are going to be based on the quality of the application. That quality is determined directly by the scores that you and the other readers on the applications that you read assign the scores. Reading proposals. Well, the first thing we're going to do is review the scoring rubric. Then we're going to have you read and score a calibration application. And the applications for the applicants closed on April 4th. Today we're doing the grant reader training. And by the 17th, we want your calibration scores into the CCIP, because without those in, you will not get assigned further scores. You're going to do this reading then between April 17th and April 26th. And human nature says, I'm going to put this off until the 11th hour. Don't do that, because we're on a very tight timeline. And so if the first week goes by and we don't see anything in your scoring inbox that's been completed, we're going to contact you and say, hey, wait a minute now. Are you going to finish this or not? Or sometimes you run into a problem not of your own doing, like an accident or an illness. If you find yourself in a situation where you can't do the reading and scoring, contact Tom. He'll do some reassignment there. So by the 26th, we want all the applications in place in the CCIP. And we'll go through that process with you yet this morning. We're going to then Deal with any discrepancy resolution in the following week. Hopefully there will be relatively few discrepancies, and we'll try to work our way through those as rapidly as possible. We'll open the CCIP to you to get your reads. At the end of that April 26th period, we're going to close the CCIP so you won't have access to it. When we do the discrepancy resolution, we'll have to reopen it again to allow you to go back in and change any of your scores. So in our example before, if Tom agreed to change his score from a 5 to a 4, that will give him the opportunity to go back in and make that change. Conversely, if I'm going to be the one making my change from a 2 to a 3, that'll give me the opportunity to do it when that CCIP reopens. At the end of that time frame, when all the discrepancies have been resolved, then we'll take the data set and do the analyses. Scoring rubrics. What says 20 prompt questions, there aren't 20, there are 25. We've got a little typo in here, but I'm sure you can understand. It's on a 6-point scale from 0 to 5. I want you to read the prompts carefully because sometimes it says A or B, sometimes it says A and B. So just read the calibration application, and as you go through the scoring rubric, you'll become more familiar with it as you read and score. CCIP procedures. It's all electronically processed. The applications are scored in the CCIP. You must have a comment for each prompt. If you don't have a comment for the prompt, the program won't allow you to save. And it's real important that you stay with that because you might be struggling with the procedure not saving, and we'll cue you on some things today how to avoid problems with saving or not saving. And you will be notified if discrepancies need to be resolved. So if no discrepancies need to be resolved, we're not going to make contact with you. We're just going to move forward. If they do need to be resolved, we'll make contact with you and we'll follow the process that we described earlier. Discrepancies will be resolved first by email. Unresolved discrepancies will result in a conference call, and during the conference call, all 3 readers or more will discuss their findings and explain their scores. Based on the discussions, readers may reduce separation of scores to 2 points or less. Selected readers will enter revised scores into the CCIP. You're only going to be selected if there are discrepancies.
Okie dokie. So I'm going to talk about the CCIP, logging into your SAFE account, and how the scoring is going to work. I'm going to walk through some screenshots, and then I can actually share my screen and kind of show you how to go in there and what it looks like. I see a question on the side here about CCIP access. There are about, 6 of you that I've been working with to make sure that you have the right role. If you are one of those 6 people, you received an email this morning that included the scoring, the calibration applications in PDF forms, the budget sheets that goes with those, and then I also sent you an offline prototype of the scoring rubric so you can follow along. I'm continuing to try to expedite that process, and if you have more questions, we can connect offline or another time. So basically, the CCIP stands for Comprehensive Continuous Improvement Plan, and it's a unified grants application and verification system. A specialized application has been added to the CCIP to facilitate the scoring of the expanding opportunities for each child application. So basically, this is where schools, districts, community partners, other programs all go to apply for funds from the Department of Education. It serves a lot of other purposes too, but that's kind of a big function of it. So when we're signing into our SAFE account to get to the CCIP, And your save account's what grants you access to the CCIP. We start on education.ohio.gov. That's just the department's website, so start there. From there, at the top of the page, above the search bar and all these social media icons, there's a link that says Save. That's what you're going to select to log in. This is what the login page looks like. And it's straightforward. Your username is going to be that string of numbers. That is your ID there. And then whatever password you set up. So from there, you click Sign In. And when you sign in, it will have a list of all the systems you have access to. So the system that we're working in today and for this competition is going to be the CCIP. Once you're inside the CCIP, to score the grants or to access the grants you've been assigned, you're going to click on the menu bar where it says Grant Score Inbox. And that's really where you're going to operate while you're doing this grant scoring. In the grant scoring inbox, there's going to be some yes/no questions on the assignments page. It's important that you answer those. It asks you that you're going to agree to complete it in the time window we provided, and it will ask if you have a conflict of interest. That is going to help us kind of inform some of our decisions moving forwards as well. When you read the application, it's important to remember that the application in the CCIP is really only going to be their budget sheet because they did not complete the application through the CCIP's system. They actually uploaded applications. So you're going to see 2+ documents for each school district that's submitted that will be their application and their 3-year budget. You can choose to print that out if it's easier, or you can just read it right there online. This one. You tell them how to do that. To go to the grant scoring box? Did I tell them to go to the grant scoring? You didn't tell them how to do that. I'll show you this. I'm going to walk everyone through the login process in 1 second. I'll share my screen. That's kind of what the scoring looks like there. It's going to look a lot more clear when I show you in a second. But if you see, there's a big blue bar at the top, which says expanding opportunities for each grant application. That's where I was kind of saying all that's going to be in there is their CCIP budget because their narrative was not done in the CCIP. But where you see this grant application documents is where you'll see their uploads. And the rubrics below, and it's pretty straightforward. There's an area drop-down menu for you to select a score, but there's also this the area there for you to put your comment. So that is pretty easy right there. When you're finished, you want to make sure that the button at the bottom reflects yes or no. Save it, and then you can return to the grant score inbox there to check your progress. It's important when it says scoring complete down there to select yes or no. It'll save whatever you have done, but we will not know that you're done scoring if it's you haven't moved that. As you've completed the scores, they'll be recorded in that page. when an application has been completely scored, the column will read true in that scoring complete area. So I'm actually going to switch and walk really quickly through kind of the login process. So I'm going to actually share my desktop right now. Okay, so there you go. If I log on here and go to education.ohio.gov, you can see here everything comes up, and above this search bar is going to be your SAFE account. And many of you won't check this box, but if you are an employee, then you would. And just like the internet, anything else, sign in with your credentials. It shows all my applications right there. I'm going to go to the CCIP. Now, once I'm in the CCIP, kind of like depending on your roles and situations, yours might look a little different from mine when you log in. You might have some IRN information on there or some other types of stuff on the sides, but this is generally what it looks like. And for this activity where you're going to mostly be operating is in this grant score inbox. So you're going to go ahead and click right there. Easy peasy. And a really good thing about this is that it kind of all the work's going to be done for you when I assign the applications in terms of finding stuff. You're not going to have to search for applications or search for plans. When you come to the grant score inbox, this is what you'll see, and it has the funding application name and then the application number there. And it has a little more information about the district or organization. But the two important things to note here are, number one, remember we said please answer this question and this question. Do you have a conflict of interest and do you agree to complete by the deadline? Please answer those. And then when you're ready to access the application, you just click on the application number. So yeah, this is what it kind of looks like once it pops up. Give it a second, make sure it loads fully, and then you will look in this area here for the application and option you're scoring. I sent out an email last week notifying you all of which options you were scoring for. That is going to come into play, especially if districts have applied for both options, because there's going to be an option 1 and option 2 application here. So you're going to have to be remember real quick, I'm option 1, I'm option 2, and then you won't have to worry about it again. Just make sure that you have memorized which option you're scoring for. From there, you're going to go ahead and read the application first in its entirety, and then we have the drop downs here, and then obviously the comment box. The last thing I want to show you is, like I said, there's some items that are for both, or not for both. They're explicitly for one or the other. And so item 5A is going to be for career pathways development applicants. It says right there. And so if we're scoring this one, we're going to go ahead and just, that was pretty good. And for 5B, note that it says for advanced coursework applicants. So if I was scoring option 1, I'm not going to score 5B here. I'm going to instead put not applicable. So that's kind of the rundown of that. Remember that the CCIP runs on a pretty strict 30-minute timeout situation here, where it runs at the top of the clock runs at the top right here, and so you're going to want to make sure that you are dragging stuff around, that you scroll the bottom here every so often and make sure that you're going to save that. Okie dokie. And so I can go back to my grant score inbox. And it tells me that I haven't completed it, but I have gotten 2 of 25 done there. So that way you know that it saved your progress. I see a really good question in here. Can applicants apply for both A and B? If yes, will there be 2 scoring sheets? They can apply for both 1 and 2. They will be scored separately, and I will contact you all about that. There's only 5 or 6 that applied for both, and I will comment, or I will not comment. I will contact you all about how we're going to process that individually. So that's a great question. The other question that's coming up is, do we need to have comments on the calibration? That
Put an NA.
Yeah, just like past opportunities, if you've participated, you do not have to have comments on the calibration tool. Please put NA in the comments so it'll let you save it there. I'm just double checking that I'm getting to everyone's questions. Okay, I see one about not having the rubric assigned. I'm going to have to check for you once we kind of get into the reading, because I'm going to need to access my computer, which is presenting right now. But I see a good conversation going on from some past readers and new readers, so thanks for your help there, everybody. I'm going to try to get this PowerPoint back on here. Thanks for your patience. There we go. We got it. So once you get the hang of the login process, it's pretty straightforward. It's like a lot of other, just stuff going on. Anything else on the internet, really. So yes, so that's a great question that just came in about number 1, how it's not scored. You would score it not applicable. You should still put a comment in it, though, like that it was either completed and made sense, or that it was incomplete and did not add to the application. One more question. What David said. I'm trying to. Okay, so they just wanted to repeat on the calibration tool comments. You do not have to write comments on the calibration application when you're filling out the rubric. Please put NA so it lets you submit the rubric in the comments. You do still have to put comments in the actual applications. So hopefully it cleared that up. Okay. Moving on. So, scoring process. I am going to be the person assigning the proposals. So, just look out for that. Any questions about the assignment comes from me. You're going to be assigned around 4 applications per person, and then your calibration as well. As with any work for the Department of Education, everything you're reading and scoring is confidential, and it should not be shared with anyone that is not associated with this scoring process. That includes other grant readers unless we've contacted you and asked you to do so. Reviewing of the scoring rubric, we looked over the rubric a little bit. Why don't you go in there and look over it now, read it, come back with any questions you have. There is one question right now that I'd like to address. Yeah, so there's 1A, 1B, 5A, 5B, and 12A, 12B. You will always be scoring one of those as NA because you're only reading for one option. They're pretty clearly marked. The prompt will start with either 4 career pathways applicants or 4 advanced coursework applicants. So if you're reading option 1, you're always going to be reading letter A, which is 4 advanced coursework applicants. If you're reading option 2, you're always going to be scoring option B, 4 advanced coursework applicants. But yeah, like I said, now why don't we take a look at the rubric, see if you have any questions there, other questions. Use that tool and chat box to communicate. I'll give you just a minute or so. Okie dokie. Some of you might have spent that time just getting in there. If you have any questions about the rubric, put it in the chat box. We'll get to those for sure. I just also wanted to provide some time for you to start digging into the application. So with that, I want you to know that the calibration application for option 1 and option 2 is number 68. The applications are both loaded in there. They're going to be very similar. Obviously, one more is targeted at implementing career pathways. One is targeted at advanced coursework. So find your way into the CCIP if you do have access. If not, I sent you the documents. Let me know if you need any of that. And start digging in the application and see how some of this looks. And we'll have some polling questions to see what we're looking at and make sure we're headed towards the right place. I got a quick question in here about what is the community eligibility provision. The community eligibility provision is a provision under the school lunch program that notes that if you have over 40% of your students who are from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, they can apply to have free lunch for their whole school district. The reason that was important to the chart is because for districts that do use that provision or have applied for it and received it, they might not have access to their entire economically disadvantaged percentage rates. because they kind of just report it at 100% because we use free and reduced lunch to measure that. So that's just for us to know that if they check the box, they do have a high proportion of poverty in their school district. So just as you're getting into the application, make sure that you're paying attention to that clock. We don't want you to lose anything. So make sure you're saving at the bottom of the page each time. Also, we're going to have those poll questions up here in a little bit, so make sure you're digging into that application, making sure you're reading a little bit about it. I am going to put myself on mute for a couple of minutes while you all do that. I'm going to work also on some people who have noted that they're having issues with either their CCIP or didn't receive things from me. So take some time now, read over those applications, and we'll talk about it in a couple minutes. Appreciate it. Thank you.
It's by 10 after 11, so that'll get us back. Okay.
Okie dokie. So I'm seeing a couple questions come in that I want to address, and I want to give some decisions for the rest, or directions, I guess, for the rest of our time together. Number one, so the scoring rubric, of course, is in the grant score inbox. When you go to that numbered application, it should be in there. If you are looking for a rubric to read along, like while you're scoring the application or while you're reading the application, the RFA does have the rubric and the scoring rubric and the rating characteristics in it. So the RFA is on our website. I sent it out with the training. Feel free to use that as a tool. For those of you that do not have your CCIP roles set up all the way yet, we're working really hard to expedite those. Please follow along in the Word form that I sent you today. That will work for our purposes right now. A couple other things I just wanted to let you know is that we really want to provide some time for you to get a really good start on this calibration application. So we're actually going to give you time over the next hour or so to read through this. Remember, read it in its entirety, do some of the scoring, have time to ask any questions. I am answering questions both in the chat box if appropriate, but if it's a more one-off issue, please also be monitoring your email. I am emailing some of you during this time. I cannot stress enough that you have to pay attention to the timer in the upper right-hand corner of the CCIP. If that clicks to 0 and you haven't saved your application, or your rubric, excuse me, it's going to lose some progress. So please save intermittently and make sure that once you save, you kind of re-access through the grant score inbox. That'll reset your timer there. We'd hate to see people losing work. So that's just something to pay attention to. But other than that, I'm going to go back on mute here for the time being, and we're going to continue to answer questions, troubleshoot some stuff, and I hope you are finding everything you need. Let me know if you're not. Thank you. Hello, everybody. I hope that the reading is going well, and I'm really sorry to interrupt. I'm having a little trouble responding via Messenger. It keeps saying things aren't going through. So I just want to answer two questions really quick that might be impacting some people's ability to be doing this right now. Number one, I just wanted to reiterate that while comments are not necessary in the calibration application, they will be necessary for each item of the applications assigned to you after that. So yes, you do not have to put the comments in the rubric here, but for the live applications, you will. The second thing, really quickly, is that the calibration applications are in that related grants application document section under application number 68. That's where you will see them for every application that you're assigned. If you are trying to find the rubric, it's right under there with the drop-down menus and everything. And again, if you need a paper copy to follow along with, please use the RFA. So keep sending those questions in, and we'll be back with you in just about 30 minutes now, or a little more. Okay, so we're going to give people just a couple more minutes here to keep looking over this, and then we'll come back and look at some questions together and kind of make sure we're on the same page. So please do stick around, even if you've completed reading and scoring, because we'll have some closing comments and reminders. A lot of questions around the budget. So something to clarify. That budget sheet that's generated in the CCIP is only going to reflect the first year of their funding. So when you're looking at the budget justification and trying to line up future plans and stuff like that, you're really going to want to look at the files that they've uploaded, the Excel 3-year spreadsheets. I'm seeing a lot of issues with people downloading the spreadsheets. I'm working on that. I am sorry about that. Some people are having no trouble. Some people are having trouble. For the calibration, we'll make sure everyone has what they need. And then again, if this ever happens with the actual applications, please contact me as soon as possible so we can resolve any issues. But I just want to make the clarification between the uploaded budget and the budget that's up there in the CCIP. And we'll come back together in maybe 5 minutes or so. Okie dokie. So I appreciate the time that people have put into this, and I appreciate um, everyone being patient with any type of technical difficulty between the CCIP or Skype or anything else. Um, if anything happens, technology wise, in terms of, oh, I can't open this file, or I'm having trouble finding this, please reach out to me immediately. I'm your go-to guy for this period, anything that has to do with the grant scoring. Um, and so email me, email the EOEC grant inbox, or give me a phone call, and I'll be sure to get back with you as quickly as possible. Um, so I think I addressed a lot of the big questions that are affecting a lot of people that came up. Now I'm going to put up some poll questions here, and we have a little discussion around how we're scoring this and where we go from here. So I'm going to put up this question, and if everyone could please participate, that'd be super helpful to us. So we have about 15 responses. This is rubric item 1A. So if you look at your rubric and have a score for 1A, if you could drop that in there. We're waiting on about 25 more responses. I see some people are typing in their answers if it's not showing up for them, or if they're on the phone, I suppose. Okie dokie. So we've got about 30 responses right now. And it seems like most of us are in the ballpark, so that's good.
Yeah, it wouldn't be anything. There wouldn't be anything we'd have to resolve a discrepancy with on this particular item.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty consistent. Good.
Good. So yes, and to the people who are wondering how to vote, you just click on that circle right there. I'm going to put up another poll item really quick, just make sure we're all in the ballpark again. Feel free to keep sending these in the meantime. So here comes the new poll, and if there's no button to submit, that's okay. You just click that circle there, and the new poll is actually item, I believe, 2 on the rubric. So this one is around needs assessment. Feel free to put your answers in there, and if you have an answer, or if you're on the phone or not having trouble with this, please type in your response. So we'll wait a couple more seconds. We're about half the people online right now have completed the poll.
Pretty heavy concentration.
Yeah.
One done here.
So with most responses in, and a couple more, feel free to trickle in there. We do see that most of you are scoring at around 3 again, which is, these are for the calibration, yes. So this is good. That a lot of people are kind of reading it the same way. We do have a bigger spread of answers on this one, and that could lead to, of course, the process of reviewing answers, making sure that we're all within 2. So that's a possibility. But again, it does look like there's pretty strong consensus around it.
Yeah, good agreement.
So we're going to do just one more poll and see about being in the right place again. And then we'll wrap up with some housekeeping things. So here on the screen, we're talking about evidence and research-based strategies, or item 6. So feel free, or please put your answers in there, or your selections for how you scored it. If you cannot see it, or you did it, or you're on the phone, please put it in the conversation box. Okie dokie, we have about 30 respondents again. This one, we do have a little more variability across. There's really not a super strong answer, though number 4 is receiving the most votes. And this is why we have that discrepancy process too, to make sure that people are given an opportunity to kind of justify their answers, discuss those, see if there's space to come closer together. Also, why it's so important for us to analyze these scores and make sure that we are protecting the grant scoring against kind of the different perspectives readers have and bring to the table. So that's the grant scoring portion that we're going to go through today, and I think that was very helpful for us, so thanks for participating. As we noted, the calibration rubrics are due on the 17th by 5 p.m. And let me pull up my PowerPoint really quick so we can talk a little bit about it. And so those calibrations are due at, like you said, I think it's 5 p.m. The 17th. So that gives you the rest of the day today, tomorrow, and part of the day Wednesday to complete that. It does note here that the grant scoring period starts on the 17th, but the question just came in: if we finish tonight, when will our live apps be loaded? You may have as soon as you finish your calibrations, I'm going to start loading applications. So the official grant reading period is the 17th to the 26th, but you get an extra day or so if you complete your calibration this evening. So we're not going to wait to do that process. We honor you all who have the time to do that ahead of time. We talked about the kind of the discrepancy scoring when we have to come back and do that. That'll be the week afterwards. I'm seeing some questions around option 1 or option 2. If you're assigned option 1, that came in an email with you all. Whether you're assigned option 1 or option 2, please only score those items for option 1 or option 2 based on your assignment. You'll receive about 4 grant applications, give or take 1 or so, depending on things like conflicts of interest and stuff like that. So you'll receive around 4 plus the calibration. And then we're hoping to have all this data pulled and given to Dr. Lodeman around the end of the month. So, just a couple of housekeeping things. The calibrations must be read and scored before I'm going to assign those applications. I will start assigning as soon as that happens. Again, Dr. Lodeman mentioned this a couple times. We have the right to reassign applications as needed. So if you haven't begun applications, that we've assigned you, and there's 2 days left in the period, and we've been trying to make contact with you, we might reassign applications. If you have conflicts of interest, they're going to be reassigned, things of that nature. Anytime you have a question or just feel like something is just a little out of place or something, please reach out to me so that we can resolve any issue. We're here to be helpful as possible through this process. So it's kind of covered that there. Yeah, that's basically just what I said. If you got any issues, please contact me immediately. Regarding payments, I am not the payment person. You will contact Naya Revere, who I will give you her contact information in just about a page. I do want to make the note that we're kind of approaching the end of the fiscal year. And I know everyone loves to get paid, so please submit invoices before June 8th, which shouldn't be a problem. That gives you a month or so to do so. Because after June 8th, our systems will be shut down as we adjust for the new fiscal year. So that could be problematic for you. But like I said, shouldn't be an issue. Here's the contact information for me. I am the person you're going to be contacting for anything related to grant scoring or the CCIP. That is the contact information for Naya Revere. you will be contacting her for anything related to, supplier relations or money or anything like that. I got a couple questions here about the few people whose roles are being adjusted in the CCIP. If you are one of the 6 people that received an email from me on Friday trying to get that role updated, and you have not had that happen yet, what I would like you to do is please complete the calibration rubric on the Word document and send it to me, and that will be like for lack of a better term, proof that you went through the process. And then I may reach out to have you just click those answers in really quick in the CCIP so we have that documented. But please follow the same timeline, and you email me directly with those. I see one person asking me about how to adjust that role. I will email you directly, Tanya. With that, are there any other questions about this? There are a few of you that I noted I'd reach out to once this is through. But if not, this is your time to share questions. And if there are no questions, I appreciate you all being here, and have a great day. Enjoy reading those calibration applications, and I look forward to assigning you those real ones, and we'll see some great plans to improve outcomes for Ohio students. So thank you all.